So welcome to Beginning Ham Radio. We are sponsored by the Portland Amateur Radio Club. And today, May 22nd, 2021, we're going to be talking about RF propagation. And I want to introduce Bruce, AA7 Papa Bravo. Thank you, Bruce, very much for willing to jump in and be our presenter for RF propagation. And I'm going to stop presenting and let you have it. Oh, and you're muted still.
Unmuted. I have too many windows open. Which one is the right window? Oh my. There it is. Now you should have a title screen.
Yep, when you see it.
So if you like the graphics, they come from Michael Colvin, Whiskey 6 Charlie Uniform Juliet, who used to be in Portland, but now is in Forest Grove. And I think he borrowed some of them from Gordon West because he used them to create slides for a technician class. And we recommend the Gordon West book for that class. So I think it's a win-win for Gordon West and the teachers of the class. But anyway, that's where almost everything came from today. So when we think about 2 meter band, the 70 centimeter band, or pretty much any VHF or UHF band, with one exception that we'll get to later, it's line of sight. There's a subtlety that the radio line of sight, for strange reasons that I don't quite understand, is somewhat farther than the visual line of sight. But if you stood on a ladder in the middle of the desert and looked for other ham radio operators, you would be limited by the curvature of the Earth. Here in Portland, you're also limited by lots of hills and valleys. There is some ability to reflect off of things and refract off of things and a couple other phenomena, but generally speaking, it's line of sight. That's not true for much of the high frequency bands, which you have some privileges, primarily primarily Morse code privileges with a technician, but with a general or extra license, you have a great deal of privileges to do voice in the high frequency bands, and we'll talk about that. So starting out with the simple situation, you're out in the desert and you're trying to find somebody to talk to on the 2 meter band. So you use the national calling frequency 146.52. Who will be able to hear you? Somebody that's in the 10 to 30 mile range. If your antenna if you're standing next to your car holding a handheld, it may be as little as 5 miles because the curvature of the Earth from 5 or 6 feet above the Earth limits it to 3 to 5 miles. You might be able to get a little farther than that if you have a real tall antenna or a high gain antenna. With an automobile setup, you might have a taller antenna, or you might be setting up a tripod with a mast. But regardless, if you're here in Portland, before you hit the horizon, you're probably going to hit a dormant volcano or the West Hills Ridge or the ridge around the Willamette or the Columbia River. So you can't go too far. And we'll talk about repeaters later, but that's kind of the nature of VHF and UHF, is it's pretty much line of sight. With high frequency bands, which are lower in frequency than very high frequency, in certain circumstances, you can go a very long way. this diagram way oversimplifies things. We'll get into the details with something more accurate in a few minutes. This supposes that with one bounce off the ionosphere, you could go between continents. In practice, there's going to be multiple bounces off the ionosphere and the surface of the Earth to go that distance. But this diagram, as I said, oversimplifies it. So when can you use the ionosphere and what frequencies? It's super complicated. If it was easy, the people that are making money setting up cell phone towers would have competition from radios that allowed you to talk around the world by bouncing off the ionosphere. You need a fair amount of knowledge to do it, a fair amount of equipment. And these days you can get some of the information you need from the internet, but there are techniques that predate the internet for figuring out which band to use at what time of day, what part of the month, and what part of the sunspot cycle. And we won't give you a formula tonight, but we'll start introducing some of the concepts. And please interrupt me with questions, shout them out. If you're too shy to shout them out, maybe type in chat and Max can give me a heads up that there's a question queued up. To get from one place to another, there are about 5 ways of doing it. And this diagram is way too complicated other than to make that point that depending on what you're trying to do, you can get there one way or another, depending on the band, the equipment, whether you're using the ionosphere, whether you're using a satellite, et cetera, et cetera. The main thing I will skip completely tonight, except to answer any questions you might have, is satellites, because I've already got too many slides, so I didn't try to find a good slide about satellites. Well, I think one of them shows one satellite, but and this one implies one where it says space waves. This is a pretty colorful diagram. It's not to scale, but it shows that the sun is putting out a lot of different radiation, and life on Earth probably would not exist if we didn't have an ionosphere and a magnetosphere to protect us from some of that energy. The ionosphere is what we'll be talking about as our friend for radio propagation, but it also protects us from some of the radiation. And the magnetosphere protects us from a lot more of it. The magnetosphere is fancy for the fact that the Earth is magnetically polarized, so the compasses work. Those same magnetic fields shield us from some of the radiation of the sun. Speaking of the sun, the stuff that the magnetosphere blocks, it doesn't help us, but some of the radiation does help us, and it's highly correlated with how many sunspots there are. It's not directly caused by the sunspots, but it's correlated with how active the sun is. When the sun gets very active, it produces more sunspots and more ionizing radiation that charges up the ionosphere. If this was a physics lecture, I'd have some more slides that would talk about how a particle will separate an atom's electrons from its nucleus, creating ions, positively charged ions in the ionosphere. I just used a whole bunch of words that are not important for this discussion, other than say that once you have those ions in the ionosphere, they can help. There's also a situation where they get in the way, and we'll talk about that in a minute. This diagram is pretty old, but if you can see my cursor, if it extended out to the present day, about 5-10 years ago, we had something that looked like this. over the last 2 or 3 years, something like this, where it says September 1986. And we think we're now on the shoulder of a rise in sunspot activity. So some of the high frequency propagation will improve dramatically if the sunspots continue to increase, and we may be able to do some pretty neat things. And that's also good news for those with technician licenses, because some of those neat things are in the 10-meter band where you do have some voice privileges, and you will be able to talk much longer distances on 10 meters if we get enough sunspots. It does require equipment that does 10 meters and an antenna that does 10 meters, but in terms of your license, you're good to go. Here's a diagram that packs in way too much information. I'm going to talk about it briefly on this slide, and then I'm going to blow it up, talk about it a bit more. It's not entirely to scale, although it's perhaps close enough for discussion. It assumes that at any hour of the day, the sun is either above us or not. Of course, if it's night, the sun is on the opposite side of the earth from where we are. And that actually affects how each of those layers are charged. The D layer, which is the closest to the earth, for esoteric reasons, it does not act as a good reflector. For most of the HF bands, it does absorb a lot of energy and keeps the radiation from those HF antennas from reaching the higher layers and getting the advantage of the higher layers. Fortunately, for ham radio distance communication, the D layer largely discharges at night and doesn't get in the way at night. And so you can much more easily reach the higher layers, in particular, the F layers. During the day, for another esoteric reason, there are actually two F layers, the F1 layer and the F2 layer. Has something to do with the amount of radiation hitting the ionosphere, produces two distinct layers of ions. At night, because the sun is not charging up that layer, the two layers merge together and form a single F layer. So depending on which band you're using, you can either use the F layer during the day or at night. Most hams use the F layer at night because the D layer is not in the way, absorbing energy, and so they are more likely to be successful at night in using the F layer to bounce things off. In the lower right-hand corner, you see a list of the layers, D, E, F, F1, and F2, with the approximate number of miles from the surface of the Earth. So you can see the F2 layer is far higher than the D layer. And one benefit of its altitude is one bounce will get you a long ways, not halfway around the world like that other diagram showed, but a long ways. And then if you're reasonably lucky, the bounce either hits where you're trying to talk to, or it hits something highly reflective like the ocean and bounces off the ocean back up to the ionosphere for another bounce off the ionosphere, possibly to the ham that you wanted to talk to that night. And let's go to the next slide where we blow all of that up. Again, we've got the D layer getting in our way. We haven't talked about the E layer yet. I'll talk about that here in a moment. During high sunspot activity, the F layer, the F1 layer gets charged up enough that 10 meters will go through the D layer because it's high enough frequency to penetrate the D layer. And during the day, will bounce off the F layer, and you can go from Oregon to Arizona, you can go from Oregon to Hawaii, and on a good day, you can go from Oregon to Australia during high sunspots periods during the daytime using 10 meters. At night, that phenomenon is still going on, but 10 meters is so high in frequency that as the F1 and F2 layers start to discharge, forming the single F layer, there's not enough charge in the F layer to successfully reflect 10 meters. So you switch to another band. And there are several other bands, particularly during high sunspot activities, because there is enough charge at night to allow you to get up to those F layers and bounce off of them on the 80, 40, and 20 and 15 meter bands at night. And the D layer, again, is not a factor at night, so it's not absorbing those relatively lower frequencies. Now, if I've confused you, it's for two reasons. One is it's very complicated, and the other is I'm not explaining it particularly well, partly because I don't claim to really understand it. Those that do a lot of HF work probably already noticed I've made some mistakes about which bands work when and what time. There are tables you can look up on the internet that gives you the lowest usable frequency and the highest usable frequency according to the day, the time, the season, etc. Lowest usable frequency is abbreviated LUF, L-U-F. Highest usable frequency is abbreviated MUF for maximum. So it's actually referred to as maximum usable frequency. And so you can look these things up. You don't have to go from memorizing what I'm telling you, but hopefully what we're covering tonight will give you some insight as to why the LUF and the MUF change from day to day, hour to hour, season to season, and from decade to decade, according to sunspots. So here's a summary, and some of the HF distance communication people can help me edit this slide and make it better, but generally the D layer absorbs all the time, but doesn't absorb the 10 meter band and higher, the 6 meter band, the 2 meter band very much, because their high frequency allows them to penetrate the D layer, but it does absorb a lot of the energy that the 80, 40, 20, and 15 meter bands emanate, keeping you from using the F layer at night, with one exception, and that is if you set up an antenna so that it can radiate pretty much straight up, near vertical, it can penetrate the D layer and make one bounce off of the F layer. So I've been successful in hearing Bothell, Washington on 60 meters during the daytime, and vice versa. I've been able to talk to Bothell, Washington. FEMA actually runs a monthly exercise, and I've been able to check in with Bothell, Washington on 60 meters using near vertical propagation. And we can show that a little bit in a future diagram. The E layer, and if I wanted to spare your brain, I wouldn't even bring it up because you don't use it most days. But it's a seasonal band that can be used at 10 meters and 6 meters. Doesn't require high sunspots. It gets charged up every so often during the day and disappears at night. And some days it gets charged up enough so you suddenly have enough E layer to get distance on 10 and 6. That'll become more common during higher sunspot activities, but there has been some E layer propagation over the last previous years when we've had low sunspots. It's so unpredictable that it's often referred to as spurious E, and the 6 meter band is sometimes referred to as the magic band because most of the time it's a local band, but every so often it's a distance band thanks to the E layer. The F1 and F2 layers and their merged version at night are used for 80, 60, and 40, sometimes 20 and 15. And during high sunspot activity, they're useful during the day on 10 and sometimes 6. So that's a lot, including a typo. I don't know how I got the U just before the quote mark and near vertical incident skywave. The reason why I gave you so many syllables is that you'll hear people refer to NVIS or NVIS. That's the acronym for those 4 long words, or one short word and 3 long words for getting nearby propagation off of the F layer, particularly during the day. Other people that have done this want to clarify or correct what I've said so far? Questions from anybody on all of this so far?
One of the things I know, HF can be a bit intimidating to newer people because there's so many bands from, you know, below 160 up to like 6 meters is what technically VHF, but a lot of times it's included in HF radios. So what bands, or what are the good bands to use during the different times of the day? Like if we weren't going to go down too far, just kind of rule of thumb.
During the day for distance communication, you would probably use 80, 60, or 40 if you had a way of propagating near vertical. And one trick there is an antenna that you might normally want fairly high off the ground. If it's not quite as high, it will tend, the earth will tend to get more energy vertical, and you can use the 80, 60, and 40 sometimes during the day, but to go a long distance on those bands, almost always you need to be operating at night when the D layer is discharged. And then in a few years, you're going to hear people talk about how much success they've had during the daytime on 20, 15, and 10, and already people are reporting success on the 20-meter band.
So is it generally it's like 20 during the day and 40, 80 at night?
Yeah, I think that's
Okay.
that's the rule of thumb. I haven't used 20 very much, but that's what I've heard. Has that been your experience, Max?
Yeah, and kind of the crossover sometimes, you know, if you're gonna jump from 20 to 40 is sort of at dusk. And it can vary a little bit depending on where you are, what kind of antenna you have. But that's what I've kind of found in my somewhat limited HF experience. Anybody
Is
else?
Dan on tonight? Dan does a lot of HF work.
He said he was going to join right about now at 6:30. I think he was doing something else or going to get home. But
Okay.
yeah, if he's on, it'd be good to hear from him just because he's worked so many, especially in contesting. It's great to just get on, but also great to know like which bands are good at which times. There is kind of a catch-22 in that, in just because, you know, 20 meters is supposedly good during the day doesn't mean it's always good.
Right.
Sometimes, you know, what is open or what bands are open, and meaning that there's fairly good propagation on those bands can surprise you sometimes. Anybody else do contesting or other HF work that want to make any comments about what you've heard so far or your experience?
This is Jim here. I'm just sitting here like a bump on a log. I'm taking all this in, Bruce, but so far I'm just a VHF, UHF type guy. And so just trying to, I read through the books earlier today to refresh myself and keep, to me, I never did well in physics in school, so I struggle with all of this all the time, but I'm learning eventually.
Max, I do HF work.
Yeah.
Yeah, usually the lower bands, lower in frequency bands, 80, 40, they work better at night, and 20 and up, they're going to work better during the day. But that's the, it's a general rule of thumb. It doesn't always work like that. Between a low sun cycle like we are in the middle right now, 40 meter is supposed to be working good at even during the day. But this sun cycle was kind of weird because 20 meter was open during the day and 40 was not great. I mean, it's, you have generalizations like that where, 40, 60, and 80 will be night bands and the other band will be day bands. But you need to kind of listen and see what's going on the band because that changes all the time. I mean, like Bruce said, the physics are very, very complex, depend a lot on the sun. They depend also on the magnetic field around the Earth, and those things they change all the time. They fluctuate but yeah, it's hard to predict what's going to work or not. And sometimes you have a band that is open, but you have no one to talk to. Also, that's happened also.
It's amazing how propagation is better during a contest than, let's say, in the middle of the week, like a Tuesday or Wednesday.
I don't think the propagation is better. It's just there is more people.
Exactly.
Also, the thing that works great is the gray line is, dusk and dawn, because you have those layers, they're starting to merge together and the D layer is starting to be less active. So you have a good propagation during that period of time, but also in the direction of the gray zone. So you have the signal, they propagate better in that gray zone. So that's how you can make pretty good contacts with Europe in the morning or Australia in the evening. Because of that, you use that kind of highway for electrons during that period.
That's a very good point.
Never tried to do the gray zone, so that I look forward to that adventure.
Yeah, and the thing also, a lot of people who are talking about the different layers. To a beginner, it sounds like oh, you can use that layer. You don't decide to use that layer, or you don't wake up in the morning and say, okay, now I'm going to use the F2 layer. It's more you're going to work on a band and the F2 layer is going to be active or not. You don't choose which which propagation you're going to use. The only so I'm saying that because, Bruce, if you are doing a contact on HF right now, that's going to be through that gray zone. You don't I mean, it's just the time of day. You don't say, oh, I'm going to try the gray zone right now.
Right. And sometimes you can test the band by listening for other communication between people. Sometimes you can find a beacon that, and if you know where the beacon is, that tells you something. And there are some neat software programs that people log their contacts in real time, and you can see who's talking to whom on the internet, and you can say, oh, I'm going to go try to talk to one of those people or someone else in that same country. In a way that feels like cheating, but it's also a sport of trying to figure out where the action is. And as Mike said, during a contest, there's more people trying, so there's more people succeeding. Sort of like baseball. If you take a lot of swings at the bat, you're gonna make more contacts than if you give up right away.
So talking about those, the clusters, I work from home. I have the radio just right next to my computer, and the radio is connected to my computer. And I have a logging software that just listen to those clusters and see, where there is activity. and automatically change the frequency of the radio.
Wow.
So like that, I am, doing emails or things like that, and the frequency on the radio change. And sometimes I have, someone in Europe. So then I jump from my email to my microphone and try to start calling. So it's so if I can hear them, usually I can talk to them. It's not 100% sure, but that's how I made a series of very good DX contacts just by doing something else and having the computer change the frequency automatically for me, and when there is a contact somewhere.
So it's semi-automatic DX then.
Yeah, I'm not a DXer, so I don't have the equipment for that. I don't have the the big huge antennas. I don't have all that thing. I just have a vertical antenna. So it's a good antenna to do long distance communication. But I wouldn't win any award, any paper right now on DX on bad propagation. I hear some people with big stepper IR and things like that. They're doing, they're talking right now to the Philippines or those regions. I cannot, even hear them with the antenna I have. But sometime when you have all the stars lining up and the good propagation, yeah, I have a signal that reaches me, and then I can jump on it because I have the computer changing the frequency automatically for me. That's a very good way and convenient way to do a contact on DX contacts.
So let me show a couple more slides, and then we can decide whether we want to go into more general Q&A. Here's just a kind of a fun cartoon slide that of distance communication via the ionosphere. Here's the exception about, or at least one of the exceptions about the rule is that you can't go beyond the horizon, very far beyond the horizon with VHF or UHF. But if a warm front comes in and creates a layering of the atmosphere where the air gets colder and then hits the warm layer, and then above the warm layer, there's more cold air, you can get some bouncing off of those differences in temperature. There's no ions involved. It actually bounces off the change in temperature between the layers of air, and you can get greater distance and over the horizon communication with VHF and sometimes even UHF. That sort of behaves like sporadic E. The phenomena is totally different than sporadic E, but what they have in common is you probably won't be able to know too much in advance whether it's possible, but if you hear there's a warm front coming in, or you hear that it's going to be a smoggy day because of inversion, those are hints that tropospheric ducting may be possible with VHF. Troposphere is the fancy word for the layer of the atmosphere where almost all the weather occurs. And then a quick discussion of repeaters. Most of you learned something about repeaters for your technician exam and more since when you've used repeaters. But you're out in the desert, but if you're in Tucson, there's Mount Lemmon. And so you can't talk line of sight between one side of Mount Lemmon and the other. The Air Force has a radar base up on top of Mount Lemmon. I don't know whether there's any ham radio repeaters, but if there were, you could set up a repeater up there and you could talk between the two sides. Because you can't have a transmitter listening to the same frequency it's transmitting on because it would create feedback. A repeater always uses two frequencies, with an exception of a time delay repeater, which is almost nobody uses. So for practical purposes, there's always a pair of frequencies, one the input frequency and the other the output frequency. And you transmit on the input frequency to the repeater, it retransmits on its output frequency, and the person listening is on the output frequency, the main frequency, if you will, for that repeater, and then can respond to you on the input frequency, and you hear it on the output frequency. So we use that a lot here in the Portland area. Most metropolitan areas have repeaters, even if they're not quite as hilly as Portland. And that same idea works if you're farther away from the repeater, as long as that antenna is line of sight to where you are and you've got enough watts to reach that distance. I think that may be all the slides. More questions, more comments, more elaboration? Did Dan join us to tell us some more about distance propagation?
I don't see Dan on yet. It looks like he's a little bit late. I'll text him and remind him, but there's a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay.
Somebody wants to know what Fred's setup is. What kind of like antenna and HF radio do you have?
I have, so the antenna is a Hustler 4BTV. It's a vertical antenna. You can install those antenna either on, on the roof of your house or on the ground. There is, there's pros and cons on, ground mounted or roof mounted. It's something that needs to be it's a longer subject of discussion. Mine is ground mounted, and I have, and for the radio, I have an ICOM IC7200. I use this one for digital, and I have a Yaesu FT891, and I use mainly this one for phone. That's my HF setup.
Nice. And so how do you get the software to integrate with the radio, or what kind of software is it?
Oh, I have a Mac, so I use a Mac Logger DX, and usually all the logger software they talk to cluster. So you just need to configure which cluster you want to use. I mean, there is a bunch of the configuration is kind of easy. And then the radio, both the radios I have, they have what they call a rig control. So you have a USB input on the radio. You plug your computer to the USB, and then in the software you tell the software which port your radio is connected to, and what type of radio, because the language between to interact with the radio is different, between the brands, and that's pretty much it. And then your software can communicate with your radio. So one of the things also that is cool, I think, is since the computer is communicating with the radio, when I log a contact, I just have to enter the call sign. Then the frequency, the mode, everything else, the power I'm using, everything else is the software is getting it from the radio.
Nice. Yeah, and like Fred was saying, I think you said that your radio has a USB port.
Yeah, both of the radio, they have a USB port.
Okay, and even some of the older radios can be controlled by a computer through what's known as CAT, and I forget what it stands for. Fred, do you happen to know?
I don't remember the acronym CAT. I don't remember the acronym CAT, but from USB, it's also called CAT. And older radio, they don't have USB, but they have a RS-232. They have a DB9 or something like that. So you can have an adapter USB to RS-232, and you can plug your older radio and control the radio through that. It's very convenient when you do digital, because if you use, for example, if you want to do FT8 will change the frequency for you, will do a bunch of things for you. So I think, I think the radio control by the software is kind of, convenient, and it helps you not make some mistakes. For example, transmit on the wrong frequencies and things like that.
That's great. Thank you, Fred. Yeah, and for those of you who are interested in actually doing this to your radio, there are quite a few radios that when you look at them, they don't even look like they can be connected to a computer. But there are quite a few pieces of software out there, some free, some low cost, that you can load up on your computer and have your computer interact with your radio. You can even do things like display what you see on the radio on your computer. And so it sounds like Fred has that set up to kind of scan for the bands that are might have good propagation on it. Is that right, Fred?
Yeah, I mean, then it's just once you plug the computer and the radio together, then it's just a matter of software you're going to install on your computer. You have, like you said, there is a bunch of different software that does different things.
That's great. The other question was about beacons. And Bruce or Fred, did you want to talk about that? I also have a web page I can share. Oh, you're muted, Bruce.
Go ahead and share the web page.
Sure.
While you're doing that, quick intro is some hams transmit on certain frequencies continuously, of course, giving their call sign at regular intervals. And if you know where their transmitter is and you can hear them, that's an indication that propagation to and from that country or state is available on that particular band.
Yeah, and I think those are you're referring to like whisper beacons.
I'm not sure. I remember why whisper is different from other beacons.
Oh, so there is you can use whisper, which is a low power digital mode for ham radio. And traditionally, I don't know which one started first, but you can set it up to be just a beacon. And anybody with a ham radio license and privilege on that particular band or particular frequency can set up their whisper computer then to transmit out their call sign and some additional beacon information. Today, unlike 10, 20 years ago, it's very easy to get a lot of information about your signal being sent or who can hear you and where. Before the internet, we did have packet radio, or we still have packet radio that have packet radio clusters. So it's sort of like the hams were some of the first people to experience the benefits of having the internet to notify other people that, hey, this band is open, or hey, this person from a rare country is on this frequency right now. You might want to get on your radio and work them. However, now with the internet, there's a lot of different ways that you can tell where your signal is going, or where your signal could be going, or where other signals are coming from, so that you know that if there is somebody or either attended or unattended radio in another country, for example, if there's one in Europe that's transmitting and you tune to a particular frequency and you hear that beacon, which is generally just what it sounds like is a radio signal that isn't necessarily meant to communicate with. It's more just a beacon or a marker, so that if you can hear that beacon, then you know that you could potentially communicate with people that are in that region. Whisper is, like I said, a digital communication. It's generally a low power digital communication. And you not only can set up a beacon of your own or listen for other whisper beacons, but you can also communicate through kind of the same protocol to other people around the world. I think most of the time when people hear about beacons, they are kind of thinking about the original International Beacon Project. And this is a series or a set of beacons that are in different regions. You can see all the different call signs there. For example, there's one in Australia, there's a few in South America. W6WX is on the West Coast in North America. And if I scroll down here, you can see a list of all the beacons here on the right-hand side. And then this web page keeps refreshing, and you can see that this particular beacon right here is transmitting on this particular frequency. So if you wanted to, you could just take a look at where that, what frequency it is and where it's located. And if you can hear that, then chances are you have a pretty good shot at communicating with people in that region of the world. And you'll see the page continuously refreshes. So what ends up happening is the beacons take turns transmitting on the different bands. So 14 megahertz, 18 megahertz, 24 and 28. And it'll say silent if the beacon is kind of not transmitting at the moment. They also transmit at different power outputs. So I believe that they start at a high, I could be wrong, somebody can correct me, but they either start at a high 100 watts and they go down to 10 watts, then 1 watt, then 100 milliwatts, or it's the other way around. But essentially that way you can, as they're transmitting, if you stop hearing them after a while, but technically they're still transmitting, that just means that maybe it takes 100 watts for you to hear them and you can't hear them at 1 watt or 100 milliwatts, but maybe you can. And so then propagation is exceptionally good in that area. So this is kind of the original beacons when we're talking about beacons, but there are many other software and websites that you can go to, for example, like the reverse beacon network, which shows you people that can hear you as you transmit. It works better with CW and digital than it does voice. And this is simply because the other radios around the world that are listening and reporting to databases on the internet that they can hear you or hear other people do a really good job of decoding CW and digital, but not so much voice. So any questions or comments on that?
For the beacons, you can, there is a large network of beacons on 6 meters and 10 meters. And, but for that, you need to look on the internet because to have the list of the frequency, especially around the area you are. So when you want to know if 6 meters is open, using a beacon it's a good idea. But you don't have like the DX, the International DX Foundation, or don't remember the name, that publishes the a list of few beacons. You have really a lot of beacons on 6 meters, so you need to go online and look which one are active or not. And if you want, I can talk a little bit more about Whisper if you're interested by that.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm going to stop sharing. And it looks like Bruce,
sorry,
thank you.
I was muted. So Whisper is it's a digital mode. You can transmit on Whisper different ways. You can use the same software that you use for FT8, and you can on the menu on the tab somewhere you're gonna have Whisper, and you can transmit on Whisper. So it's very, very convenient for someone who's experimenting with an antenna or installing a new antenna to see how your antenna is performing and how far you can go, or when you want to do a test between two antennas. That's what I use it. Most often I use Whisper for that. I am playing and experimenting with an antenna. I'm going to transmit for few hours on Whisper, and I can see where my signal was picked up and how far I could go, etc., etc. You can use your computer. You can also use a Raspberry Pi with a hat that you put on your Raspberry Pi, and then it's going to be I think 100 milliwatt. You plug that to your antenna, and you're going to transmit on Whisper, and then you have the Whisper net that's going to give you an idea on how far your signal is going. You have another website. crap, I forgot the name. Is the Explorer. It's going to give you, you can, look for your call sign and or someone call sign, and you're going to see how, how far your signal is going. And then there is a bunch of software that's going to take the logs from WhisperNet and then kind of draw maps or draw, statistics about your signal, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very, very convenient way to not only see if you have propagation, but also test your equipment and see how especially your antenna is performing.
Yeah, so this is the WhisperNet, I believe, that you were talking about. Is that right? The site?
Yeah, that's right.
And so what this is showing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is there are whisper stations that are basically listening to specific frequencies. And if you wanted to test your antenna or test how well one antenna is doing to another, then you would just kind of put out your call sign on Morse code, or I'm sorry, on Whisper rather, which is the digital mode. And then this map would kind of, you can filter for just your call sign if you wanted to, and find out.
So the thing, you put the band, you see just below update, you can choose the band you want. Mm-hmm. If you choose 40, for example, do update. Exercise and match up how these three things of getting out. And on call sign, you pick a random call sign on the map, and you put that call sign here, and you're going to see all the contacts that are made by that call sign. Do you click on update?
Yes.
No, you cannot take a random call sign because you don't know if it's transmitting or not. You just put a call sign that you saw on the map before. So like that, you can. It's just to show you.
Gotcha. Okay. I was doing it on the Who's Online. Go back to the map. I'm looking for a.
I can see W. Oh yeah, you find one.
No, that's not one. Yeah, can you make call sign that you see?
Let me. You're on 40 meters?
Yes.
Oops, sorry. Put N4 NEZ, November Echo Zulu. And yeah, put last 24 hours. Oh, he's only transmitting. No, it's not transmitting. Put Alpha Echo 7 Yankee Quebec. So if you zoom in on the map, you're going to see that call sign. Or you put all the bands, but you could see all the arrow pointing at that station and going, kind of all around the world right now.
Yeah, so that person is probably located here.
You can zoom in.
Is that right? There we go. So correct me if I'm wrong. So what we're kind of looking at is this station is transmitting.
Yeah.
And then all of these stations here have heard that station.
Yes. So when it's very convenient when you're testing an antenna, because you put your call sign, you've been transmitting for an hour or half an hour or something like that on that frequency, and you put your call sign on that map, and you see all the station that can hear you.
And so this is on Whisper, which is a digital mode.
Yeah.
So the amazing thing is that on that particular mode, it's a generally like PSK 31 and other digital modes. It's low power. Computers can pick out the signal, even if the noise floor is high or if the signal is very close to the noise floor. So it's not surprising that this many people can hear that one station transmitting.
Yeah, the only problem, the problem I have with Whisper is I don't know how much power the guy is transmitting with.
Yeah.
So it's hard to, when you look at someone else, it's hard to make any conclusion on what he's doing because you don't know how much power he's using. When I'm testing my antenna, I know I'm transmitting with 100 milliwatt, and I can see how far I can go with that 100 milliwatt. It can kind of give me an idea on, how especially when I do a A/B comparison between two antennas, because I use the same power. But here, the guy maybe is transmitting with 100 watt. I don't know. And
yeah, so for this particular type of beacon, or I guess you could even say reverse beacon, since when you're transmitting, you are the beacon.
Yeah.
And it's very useful to kind of just figure out where your signal is going versus where other beacon signals are coming from.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So
Anybody?
one of the, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask if anybody had any questions or want to jump in at this point. Go ahead, Fred.
So one other resource I use is a PSK reporter. Same thing to see how things are working. I do a fair amount of digital. So what I do is I transmit on PSK reporter for, I send a CQ on PSK reporter for, I don't know, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and I look who got my signal. And then it gives me a sense of if the band is open or not. It gives me a sense of if I have a lot of people listening at that point, if I will be able to make a contact easily or not. It's in those cases more, an art than a science, because it's a, kind of after I haven't transmitted today on PSK.
Okay.
I haven't used PSK today, but yeah, usually I do that. I just turn on my radio, go on PSK. I don't see any signal. I look at, give me an idea of there's people listening and how far I can be heard, and then it gives me also it's gonna give me a signal report, like the person that heard me, how strong my signal was. And it's going to give me a good idea if the band is open or not, and if I will be able to make contacts on that day, or I mean far away contacts or close by, or etc. etc. It's give me a sense of what's going on the band.
And this is one of a good site to even come take a look at just where that gray line is. So you can see on the map itself that what parts or what countries or even what states are experiencing that, like in that twilight zone. And so when that gray line comes to where you are, so for example, it'll move over to the west here fairly soon, and then you'll actually be able to contact people that are on that green line, potentially, depending on propagation.
So you see the gray line is going to towards Europe. So in an hour, you will be able to make contacts with Europe easily. Or if you go in the other direction, it's going towards Australia, New Zealand. So that's why Australia, New Zealand on the evening, or Europe in the evening is it's a good bet.
Yeah. And this is another benefit of connecting your radio to your computer, is that it doesn't take a lot of fancy equipment to actually collect data, to listen to portions of the band where digital is, or Morse code is broadcast, or not broadcast, but sent. And when your radio and your computer hear call signs, Morse code or digital, then they'll actually report that to this database in the cloud. And then you would actually be one of those pinpoints there, and you would be reporting what other people that you're hearing. Cool. Thanks very much, Fred, for sharing kind of what you guys do. Any other questions? Propagation or any other thing ham radio related? Thinking about the software that is out there, probably one of the most popular ones is for connecting your computer is, I'm missing the name, but Fred or Bruce, do you know which one I'm talking about?
The one for what?
Oh, for connecting.
For FLDG? You are talking about FLDG?
Yeah, so FLDigi is a software that you can use for transmitting and receiving digital.
FLRig?
Ham Radio Deluxe.
Oh, that's the logging software.
Yes. Yeah, so Ham Radio Deluxe is one of many pieces of software that you can use to control your radio, to log. I have even somebody here locally that was able to use Ham Radio Deluxe and connect it up to a couple of servos, and it was able to then use just a chopstick to point to a satellite as it was passing across the horizon. And so if you want to try to contact people by bouncing or retranslating your signal through satellites that are orbiting the sky, ham radio satellites, then that's an easy way to kind of figure out where the satellite is as it's making its pass across the sky. So there's quite a few. Ham Radio Deluxe, I think you do need to pay for it, and I can't remember if it's a one-time or annual fee. But there are a few other pieces of software that work pretty well for either controlling your radio or communicating with your radio.
Also, it controls, like you said, if you have, so those software, they're also connected on the internet, and they're connected to QRZ. So for example, if let's say I'm talking to you, I put your call sign. I don't remember a call sign. I think it ends by max, but I don't remember. Yep. It's W7 max?
K2.
K2 max.
Yep.
So I put, my logging software, I put K2 max, I hit return, and then it goes on, the software goes on QRZ, gets your information for QRZ, on QRZ, sees that you're located in Portland, and automatically my antenna will turn towards Portland.
Yeah, and that's because QRZ knows my location, just because that's my address that I have on file with the FCC.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, but you need to create an account on QRZ and put some information also. It's not just only your address.
Yes.
And that's the thing that is frustrating is someone who goes on QRZ and put fake information, then the antenna is pointing in the wrong direction. And then he's wondering why no one wants to talk to him.
I sometimes will have people, when I'm communicating on HF, they will mistakenly think that I'm over on the East Coast because of the K2.
Yeah.
Yes, and then they will redirect their antenna to where they think I am, and I lose their signal completely. And that's mainly with beam antennas. So their signal, they may have been communicating with me early, but if they rotate their antenna, then it may completely disappear. I wanted to pull up QRZ because it's a great site if you want to take a look or look up other people's information. So if you were to make a contact with me, but you wanted to check to make sure that you have the correct zip code for sending a QSL card, or my email address is also listed on here. So this is in my, just my page, I guess. I don't have anything in my biography. Other people have quite a bit in their biography pictures.
I have a bunch of things on my biography.
Oh, that's great. And I'm sorry, is it W6?
Yeah.
There you go. So all your projects.
I haven't updated that page in 2 or 3 years, so.
And then there's also a couple of tabs up here at the top. So if you wanted to take a look at more of like some automatic information that's generated based on your address, it'll give you things like the address, the class, what county you're in. So there's a lot of people that collect counties, like the number of counties that they've contacted. So this is a great way to look up and confirm what county that person is in, as long as they, of course, keep their page up to date. And it looks like for QSLs, which is essentially confirming contact, you accept QSLs on QRZ.com, Logbook of the World, and QSL cards.